We are going to be talking about Section J1 of the purchase contract. So, Section J is inspections, maintenance, and warranties. J1 states general inspection of the property contingency. At buyer's sole cost and expense, buyers shall have the right to personally or by an expert, professional, or other representative of buyer's choice A, inspect the property or any portion thereof. B, inspect all major appliances and fixtures, plumbing, electric, and gas included in the sale. C, inspect all public records relating to the property and its use. And D, review all matters concerning the property, including those described in paragraph I-6. Seller shall provide buyer and buyer's representative access to the property for inspection during reasonable hours with reasonable prior notice to seller. The obligation of buyer to purchase the property is contingent upon buyer's approval of inspections and review of all matters described in paragraph A6 within blank days after acceptance date. All inspections and reviews must be completed within within this time period. Seller agrees that the property inspection requires that the utilities be turned on, including propane, if applicable, at seller's expense. If buyer disapproves of the inspection or reviews results within a specific time period, buyer may elect to terminate this purchase contract pursuant to paragraph O2. The buyer's rights under this paragraph do not affect buyer's rights and timelines under section I. If buyer fails to make an election in writing to terminate this purchase contract within the specified time period, then buyer will have waived this contingency. So J1 is probably one of the most important contingencies that a buyer has, and it's to do what most people think is just a home inspection. And it is. In most terms, it's just a home inspection. But one thing to bear in mind too is the older the property is, you want to make sure that you give yourself, and we want to be competitive in a market like we're in right now, but we want to give ourselves enough time to conduct the necessary inspections. So if the property is 60 or 70 years old, having a 7-day J1 is probably not long enough. You're probably going to want to have not only enough time for a home inspector to be out there in a property with that age. He'd be out there probably 5 to 8 hours. Not only that, but if it's an older home or a home that its roof is on its last leg, is you might want to have a roofer out there. If when you're doing the walkthrough that there's maybe outdated electrical problems or what have you, you might want to have an electrician out there. So give yourself enough time, and especially, by the way, sewer scoping is a good one. So any property that's over 30 years old, you should have the sewer scoped anyways on a single family home. But give yourself enough time. There's a balance there that you want to be competitive, but you also want to give enough time for the buyer to ensure that they've done their due diligence. So J2 goes on. Recommendation regarding home inspection. It is strongly recommended the buyer obtain a home inspection as well as inspections in specialized areas beyond the scope of the standard home inspection service. That's what we just spoke about. J3, property condition maintenance and final walkthrough. Seller shall maintain the interior and exterior of the property, including all inclusions, in the same condition as when buyer inspected the property pursuant to paragraph J1, or as otherwise repaired and or corrected as agreed to in writing between buyer and seller. Buyer and or buyer's representative shall have the right to conduct a final walkthrough of the property no later than blank days prior to closing. A, to confirm the property is in the same condition on the date that the buyer inspected the property pursuant to paragraph J1, and or B, to inspect any repairs and or corrections made by seller as agreed to in writing between buyer and seller. Seller understands that the final walkthrough requires the utilities to be on, including propane if applicable, at seller's expense. If the property has not been maintained or repaired and or corrected as agreed to in writing between buyer and seller, then the provisions of paragraph J4 shall apply, and the buyer shall have the right to repeat the final walkthrough of the property after the repairs are completed and prior to closing. If buyer and or buyer's representative fail to conduct the final walkthrough within the specified time frame or time period, buyer will have waived this right. So another thing to note in here is we always recommend putting a minimum of 5 days into J3. And the reason for that is, what if it's a long weekend? What if it's a holiday that it falls under? There's a lot of reasons why you want to make sure that you have enough time. And if there's a deficiency and there's new damage that occurs, or they're supposed to repair something but they didn't, if you have in there, and I've seen this, 1 day or 2 days or even 3 days, that necessarily won't be enough time. What if you did the final walkthrough on a Friday with the intention to close on a Monday? Being over a weekend, you don't have enough time to ask for a withholding or try to negotiate a resolution or remedy within that time frame, especially over the weekend when escrow is closed. So give yourself enough time. That should be 5 days at minimum, if not longer, depending on when you plan on closing. J4, with withheld collected funds for repairs and maintenance. If seller has failed to maintain the property pursuant to paragraph J3 or has not completed any agreed upon repairs and or corrections no later than the time period specified in paragraph J3, the parties agree that 150% of the estimated cost shall be withheld collected from the seller and retained in escrow until completion. The parties shall immediately sign escrow's formal withholding and disbursement instructions agreement, confirming the withholding set forth in this paragraph. All bills for maintenance and repairs corrections will be paid through escrow. Any balance remaining after completion of all maintenance and repairs corrections shall be returned to seller, provided, however, that if maintenance and repairs corrections are not completed by closing date or within a certain amount of days after closing, said funds will be dispersed to buyer. So we always recommend closing date. You never want things to drag on beyond that. So it should be NA for the number of days, because you're going to select closing date as the option there for J4. J5, no continuing warranty. Buyer understands that there is no continuing warranty, express or implied, after closing regarding the interior or exterior of the property. J6, home warranty programs. Buyer understands that the buyer may obtain from a third party for a fee home warranties covering appliances, electrical and or gas and plumbing fixtures and equipment, and other items included in the property. J7, existing warranties, plans, etc. Seller shall provide to buyer at closing, if such items are in seller's possession, any warranty documents covering the improvements and all other property being sold. B, instruction booklets covering the appliances being sold. And C, blueprints, specifications, architectural and engineering drawings related to the property which may not reflect improvements as built. Buyer understands that A, any warranties delivered to seller or seller to buyer represent obligations of other persons or entities, not seller. B, the warranties and other documents are provided for informational purposes only. And C, seller does not promise any such warranties are transferred to buyer. And D, buyer must contact the providers of such warranties to determine whether the warranties are transferable to buyers. Next is J8, removal of items from property, J9, cleaning, and J10, which is pet-related treatment. Specifically for J3, which is a final walkthrough, J8 and J9, they should be chronological. So I've seen a lot of people do 3 days for J3, and then they'll put 3 days for J8 and 3 days for J9. So ask yourself logically, common sense is you can't have the property items from property removed on the same day that it's going to be clean, on the same day that you're going to have a final walkthrough. Agents do this all the time. So do yourself a favor. And if you put in here, which I'm recommending you do, is 5 days for right here for J3, then the items should be removed from the property in 7 days. It should be cleaned in 6 days. Therefore, you can do the final walkthrough in 5 days. The other thing too for for final J9 is this should be NA. The seller shall have the entire property professionally cleaned with receipts provided. Be careful when you check this, because entire property also means exterior. And on the buy side, if you're the one that's crafting this purchase contract, if the buyer has a desire to have the exterior cleaned, you should note that in section Q, so there's no confusion or issues that occur at closing. Pet-related treatment, you don't need to ask for a pet treatment if, in fact, you don't have any knowledge or see any pets on site. If you do, you can click that and then put 1 day after closing, so it's immediate. And that concludes section J.